of course, we see that all of our scriptures are based on questions and answers. And questions can be seen in different ways. But basically, questions allow for profound philosophy to come about, because questions are very pointed, questions are very practical, and questions are... Jai Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki Jai, Shri Ganetai ki Jai. Yeah, questions are very pointed, they zone into something very specific. Questions are very practical, because there's a specific answer that someone is looking for. And questions really point to the human condition, because they very much come from our practical experience of life. And therefore they're a very powerful means to bring about amazing insights that we need to hear. So of course we know that the Bhagavad-gita is basically a book of questions and answers. The Bhagavad-gita is an incredible book. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he says, many, many eons ago, the Ganga came into the universe by flowing through the lotus foot of the Supreme Lord. And therefore that Ganges flows from the foot of Vamandev through the universal coverings and comes into the world as we know it. And he says, if one bathes in the Ganga, then one will flow back towards the lotus feet of the Lord. That's very nice. But then he says, in Dwapara Yuga, that same Ganga comes through the mouth of Krishna in the form of the Bhagavad-gita. And therefore, whoever bathes their mind and intellect in the words of the Gita, they will flow towards Krishna's smiling face. But then he also says that that same Ganga came in Kali Yuga through the tears of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when he was in the kirtan. And therefore anyone who immerses themselves in the prema kirtan of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will then, through the tears coming from the Lord's eyes, enter into the Lord's heart. So in this way the Ganga is coming to us in different forms, and we take advantage of all three, right? So we bathe in the Ganga, we hear the Bhagavad-gita, and then we engage in the kirtan of Krishna. Let me just say a few things about the questions that Arjuna asks Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita, because this will help us to orientate what kind of questions we should be asking in our lives. The first very, very striking thing about the Bhagavad-gita is that the Gita is basically framed in two ways. The outer frame of the Bhagavad-gita is the question asked by Dhritarashtra to Sanjaya, and then it's framed at the end by Sanjaya giving the answer to Dhritarashtra. So what was Dhritarashtra's first question that frames the Bhagavad-gita? Mamaka Pandavascheva Kimakurvata Sanjaya. What happened when my sons and the sons of Pandu assembled on the battlefield of Kurukshetra? And what was the final answer that Sanjaya gives right at the end of the Gita? Yatra Yogeshvara Krishna, Yatra Partho Dhanurdhara, Tatra Shrir Vijayo Bhutir Dhruvanitir Matir Mama. Basically, wherever there is Krishna, there is victory. And therefore, if you want to know what's going to happen to your sons, then you can, by logical deduction, understand their fate. The second framing of the Bhagavad-gita is between Arjuna's question to Krishna and Krishna's final answer to Arjuna. So what's Arjuna's first question to Krishna? Dharma shamuda chaitaha, he's saying, Karpanya dosho pahata svabhava prachami tvam dharma shamuda chaitaha. Please, Krishna, tell me why I'm existing. What is my duty? What is my purpose? What is my dharma, basically? And what's Krishna's final answer to Arjuna? Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam saranam. Your essential purpose is to surrender your paro dharma. So the first thing is that these two questions are very interesting, because if you basically look at Dhritarashtra's question, his is a question of what? What did my sons do? What were the events? He's asking about people and events. And therefore his question is more superficial, and therefore he doesn't derive so much wisdom. But Arjuna's question is a question of why, is a question of purpose, is a question of orientation of his life. And therefore his question is much deeper. Therefore, more important than how and what questions are questions of why. Because if you start with why, then the how and the what becomes very, very clear. Some people ask, what should I do in this situation? I'm in a dilemma. What decision should I make? But if you don't have a why, if you don't have an orientation, if you don't have a reference point, then every single decision becomes very hard. But once you have the why, then the how and the what, I'm not going to say it's easy, it's still difficult, but it becomes much easier because you have a reference point. Therefore, another one of the acharyas of our age, Simon Sinek, wrote a very famous book, Start with Why. We should always start with why. So this is what Arjuna does. So it's very, very interesting. So Arjuna starts with these questions. Does anyone know how many questions Arjuna asks Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita? There's 700 verses. How many questions do you think Arjuna asks Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita? We counted it. Anyone know? Want to have a guess? Want to have a guess? 100 questions. That would only give Krishna an average of 7 verses every question to answer.
I would
which could be.
that in few verses there were like many, many questions. And if you would...
Oh, like that? I'm just talking about verses where Arjuna is asking questions. Actually, if you count it, there's basically, you could say 17, 18 verses where Arjuna asks questions. So that means, you can say on average every 40 verses there's a question. Of course it's not like that, but just to get an idea of proportion. So Arjuna asked 17 questions in the Gita. And if you look at the nature of Arjuna's questions, they come in 3 categories. One category of question is Arjuna is saying to Krishna, I don't quite understand what you're saying. I don't understand what you're saying. That's one type of question Arjuna asks Krishna. Another type of question Arjuna asks Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita is, I understand what you're saying, but I don't understand how this is logical. It doesn't compute with my understanding of life. So this is not believable to me. And the third type of question that Arjuna asks is, he says like, I understand this and it's believable to me, but I don't know, Krishna, how I'm supposed to practice this. So the first category of question, I don't understand this. For example, in the beginning, Arjuna is not sure, like how does work and detachment, or how do they kind of come together? How does action and inaction kind of coexist? How can I be spiritual and at the same time be in this world? Arjuna doesn't quite understand. He's saying, Krishna, you're giving me equivocal instructions or contradictory instructions. So that's the example of that kind of question. Then certain times Arjuna says to Krishna, this is not believable. Like for example, in the 4th chapter, Krishna says to Arjuna that I instructed this science to who? In the original? To the sun god. So Arjuna kind of looks at Krishna in the 4th verse and says, you instructed, that's not believable. It doesn't sound logical because the sun god is far superior in birth. I mean, he came eons ago and here you are. How in the world did you instruct him? That doesn't sound logical. So then Krishna explains to him why it is logical. And then some things Arjuna asks, he says, I just don't know how this is practical. Like say for example in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna is telling Arjuna that he has to control the mind. So what does Arjuna say? Chanchalam himana Krishna pramati balavadridam. Tashaham nigraham manye vayuriva sudushkaram. I know you're saying it, Krishna, but it doesn't seem practical. It seems impractical and unendurable to me. Therefore, I know it makes sense, and I know it's, but how do you do it? So these are some of the types of questions we can have in our life. We will have in our life. There will be some things that you just don't understand. There will be some things that you find hard to believe. And there will be other things which you find difficult to practice. Because Arjuna has asked every question before we can even ask it. So Arjuna has paved the way. And then if you look at the topics of the questions of what Arjuna asks, they're so powerful, because if you walk into Waterstones today and you look at a shelf on like smart thinking or self-development, you'll find that the roots of all of those topics that are being addressed are in the Bhagavad-gita in questions that Arjuna already asked. Like say for example, right in the beginning, Arjuna is asking about success and purpose. Because he's telling Krishna that even if I win this battle and I attain an unrivaled kingdom on earth, I don't know how if it's going to really make me happy. What is success? So you go into a bookshop today and there are so many books on how to find what is your success, how to find meaning, how to find purpose. Arjuna already asked that question to Krishna. In the 3rd chapter, Krishna is teaching Arjuna about how to work in this world, and then Arjuna asks a question about temptation. He says, why is it, Krishna, that even when I know the right thing to do, I still keep doing the wrong thing? Why do I fall prey to temptation? And you go in the world today, falling prey to temptation, overcoming addictive behaviors, resisting impulse. For example, if you look at someone like Jordan Peterson, who's very big in the world today, is one of his main messages to the world about how to exercise self-restraint. Huge thing in the world. Arjuna already asked that question. He asked it right there in the Bhagavad-gita. So much in the world today about character. How do I become the best version of myself? What qualities do I need to develop in order to find my success? How many times in the Bhagavad-gita does Arjuna ask question of character? What is the character of a self-realized soul? How do they walk? How do they talk? How do they interact with the world? How do they deal with the difficulties of material nature? Arjuna already asked that question. Biggest talking point in the world today is mental health. And Arjuna already asked those questions on the mind, because practically in the 6th chapter, that's the theme that Krishna picks up based on Arjuna's reservations. So Arjuna already asked all about the mind, giving us deep insights into that. So can you begin to see how the nature of Arjuna's questions, the themes of Arjuna's questions are basically so closely relating to the human condition. This is why the Bhagavad-gita is really the book for the world. It's the book for helping people excel on all levels. And another thing you can see about Arjuna is the mood in which he asks questions is also very interesting. Because he embodies the point that Krishna makes, that there should be pranipat, there should be humility, there should be pariprashna, there should be questioning, and there should be seva. There should be a willingness to then reciprocate and act in that relationship. And you see this perfect balance of humility. Like say for example in the 4th chapter, when Arjuna asks this question about how is it, Krishna, that you were existing, when the sun god was here? The way Arjuna phrases it in the Sanskrit, he says, Katam va vijaniyan. It's a very respectful way of saying to Krishna that I don't get this. He says, Katam va vijaniyan literally means, how, Krishna, am I able to understand this? This is a very cultured way of saying Krishna, I don't get this. This makes no sense to me. But he says to Krishna, Katam va vijaniyan. How, Krishna, am I able to understand this? You see, like when we read the Gita, we're not just reading philosophy, but we're getting a deep insight into the culture and the character of the people who are speaking. So Arjuna embodies perfect humility when he's asking questions, and it's that humility and that humble spirit which then really comes forward. And Krishna's answers in the Gita are just as good as Arjuna's questions. Because if you look closely at Krishna's answers, he tells Arjuna what to do. Not just that, he tells Arjuna why he should do it. Not just that, he tells him how to do it. And not just that, on many occasions he tells him the benefits of actually doing it. Oftentimes, if you give someone advice and they don't follow it, it may be because you've missed out one of these 4 things, or maybe more. The first thing is you have to make it clear what someone should do. But not just that, you should tell them why they should do it. There should be a philosophy, there should be a logical reasoning behind it. But not just that, how you should give them some practical advice on how to actually do it. And not just that, you should give them inspiration. Like, if you do this, then these great things will happen. So just by, you don't need to go to a coaching school. You can just learn amazing mentoring, amazing coaching from how Krishna deals with Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Krishna is also an ideal coach, because it's very interesting when you see the dialogue of the Gita. What Krishna often does is he acts as Arjuna's friend, like he has a horizontal relationship with him, like we're friends here. And then Krishna takes the position of being an authority. And then he comes down to being a friend again. And then he becomes an authority again. And then he comes down. This is actually very deeply psychological. This is actually the best way of teaching someone. Not that you're just constantly their authority, or you're just in a friendly relationship with them, but you know how to balance both aspects. So sometimes Krishna will just take a very friendly position. Iti me mati is just my opinion. And then sometimes Krishna will come in the universal form, or right at the end he'll say, Shrinu me paramam vacha, this is my supreme instruction. And he will be very... And then again Krishna will say, Yata icha tata kuru, you do what you want to do. So he's perfectly coaching him by bringing him close and then giving him depth. Bringing him close and then giving him depth. So it's a beautiful dialogue, the Bhagavad-gita. So many questions, so many beautiful answers. And because the dialogue is so perfect, then at the end Arjuna says, Nasta moha smriti labdva tvat prasadat mayachyuta stitosmi gata sandeha karishye vachanam tava. So my illusion is gone, my memory is regained, all my doubts have been dissipated, and I'm completely clear what I'm supposed to do, and I'm ready to act. So this is the effect of having a good dialogue, perfect questions, perfect answers. So with that, just something on questions and answers and the dialogue of the Gita. So we should train ourselves to ask good questions, to be in an inquisitive frame of mind. I won't do it today, but sometimes we've played this exercise. It's like a thought exercise where you have to have a conversation with someone, only asking questions. You can try it sometime. It's good to get in the inquisitive state of mind to learn how to frame questions. Okay, it's hot in here, is it?
Yes.
Should we open it? Okay, the window is open. Okay. All right, yes, so over to you. And remember, you don't only have to ask questions, you can also answer. So if someone asks a question and you feel like you have something you'd like to input, then by all means.
I had this question from this morning, actually. So I want to ask how to practice vulnerability in spiritual life, and just a little bit, if you can say, like, why is it so important for our spiritual life as well, and how to practice it? Because as I understood, like, it's also connected with honesty, and it helps us open our hearts, like, to others, like devotees, all the people we meet, and also in the end to Krishna. So how to practice it every day?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Actually, I don't like the word vulnerable so much, because basically the word vulnerable, then immediately in your mind you're thinking, I'm putting myself in a position where things are going to go wrong. And basically this is our basic problem, that in situations, if we're constantly thinking about what can go wrong, then we'll never really want to go there. So basically being vulnerable is basically the concept of going into a space of the unknown, right? If you want to experience the totality of life, whether it be something you're trying to achieve, or a relationship you're trying to forge, or a skill that you're trying to develop, or a quality in your character that you're trying to nurture, it can only ever be possible if you're ready to go into the unknown, right? Because there's comfort zone, there's creative zone, and then there's crisis zone. So it means we have to move out of a comfort zone. That stands for anything in life. So basically, what we're trying to do in relationships is we're allowing to be vulnerable in a relationship. Basically means to go into a space where you're allowing that person to share a piece of their heart with you, to show their affection and their care and their love for you. And the most powerful way to do that is by going into a vulnerable space and then allowing them to do that. But if you never go into a vulnerable space, then you never give them that opportunity to exhibit that type of love for you. For example, in self-development exercises, what they sometimes do in teamwork is they have two people facing the same direction, and then they tell the person in front that now you have to just fall back. And don't worry, the person behind will catch you. And everyone in the crowd is looking, saying like, yeah, what's the big deal? He's there, just go. But when you're doing it, it's like terrifying. But then if you let go, then you give that opportunity for that person to catch you. And when you give that opportunity for that person to catch you, then this trust is developed. So instead of using the word vulnerable, let's just talk about being excited about journeying into the unknown. Let's get excited about journeying into the unknown. Because that is where we discover a deeper potentiality, a deeper quality of life. Sometimes I think about Srila Prabhupada's life, and basically it was just a constant journey into the unknown. Like Srila Prabhupada got he realized, I have to fulfill the order of my spiritual master. He renounced family life, went to Vrindavan. That was a journey into the unknown, like completely. He said, I'm just crying alone here in the wilderness, Then later on, Srila Prabhupada got a dream, multiple dreams to take sannyas. He said, I was horrified, but he did it. It was a journey into the unknown. Then later on, Srila Prabhupada got a passage on board the Jaladuta to go to America. Again, a journey into the unknown. Then he arrived in Butler, Pennsylvania, but then he realized this is not where I'm going to trigger the revolution. So he went to New York. Again, a journey into the unknown. But in New York, he was in Mishra's apartment, and somehow he didn't want to just be the uptown Swami. So then he said, I'm going down to the Lower East Side. Again, a journey into the unknown. So Srila Prabhupada was just continually ready to make a step into the unknown. And I think that is the defining factor in the quality of our life. Like, how much are we ready to do that? Because that's where the magic happens. As Christopher Columbus says, unless you are willing to sail away from the shores, you can never discover what's on the horizon. But it's scary. So I think also I just wanted, because Damodar Prasad Prabhu asked this morning about how do we deal with that fear. So I was thinking about that actually today. But just connected to this, I was thinking that fear doesn't mean you have, to be brave doesn't mean to you that you have an absence of fear. Bravery doesn't mean an absence of fear. Bravery means your purpose is much bigger than your fear. I'll just repeat that. Bravery doesn't mean you don't have fear. Bravery means you have a purpose which is much bigger than your fear, which is then driving you to just explore and go into that unknown space. So yeah, some thoughts.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maharaj, for this introduction. I have a question regarding Bhagavad-gita itself, and it's about that I've heard that the Bhagavad-gita is built up like a vyuha, and within the vyuha there is a core chapters, and within the core chapters there is a core verse. I've always been curious about that, so I wonder if you can speak a little bit about it.
So your question is, you've heard that the Bhagavad-gita is like a vyuha, like a military phalanx, like a formation, and in every chapter there are key verses, and like that?
There are it's like a vyuha, but within the vyuha there is like chapters that are protected by the external chapters.
Okay.
But I also would like to know, why is it built up like that? Sorry.
Okay, yeah. Well, what comes to mind when you ask this question is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's analysis. He basically says the Bhagavad-gita is like a jewel box. He gives the metaphor of a jewel box. So he says the first 6 chapters are the base of the jewel box, because that's the immediate concern of that. That's what, like, we need to practice spiritual life, but we need a basis from which we can do it. And therefore the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad-gita, he says, are like the base of the jewel box, which are all about karma yoga. And then of course he says the middle 6 chapters are the jewel within the jewel box, the bhakti, the love, which is our ultimate aspiration. And then he says the final 6 chapters are like a lid, because basically what they do is that final 6 chapters is how to navigate material nature, how to navigate the modes of nature, the different, the inverted banyan tree of this material world, how to essentially live in this world but remain free from that influence, how to not be tainted by the material world, how to be detached, how to let go, jnana yoga. And so he says the final 6 chapters are like the lid. And then what he says is that the top of the lid has an inscription, and that inscription is 1865, which is basically Manmana Bhava Mad Bhakto. And what he says is that the inscription on the top of the jewel box, 1865, the very final thing that Krishna says, indicates exactly what's inside the jewel box. So therefore 1865 and 934 are basically verbatim the same, because the inscription on the jewel box tells you what's inside the jewel box, like that. So like this, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur analyzes the structure of the Gita in that way. I've never heard the Gita compared to a military formation. Maybe someone else has. I've not heard that myself. But another way to see the Gita is that the Gita is basically like a song, right? So if you think about a song, it never just goes like this, right? Like what you find in a song is it has like a chorus. So you'll find basically when you look at the Gita, it's like that, like Krishna comes back to the same point again and again. It's like the chorus coming back to the chorus, and then right at the end there's the final. accentuated chorus, so it's like that. If you think of a song, then it has like low points, and it has kind of subdued points, and then it has very high, like universal form, like da 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 da. It's like like a climax of the song, very dramatic, and then it comes down, and then it becomes very philosophical. So like that, a song is like that. It's never just like the. No, it like goes up and it goes down. There's a chorus. There's a theme that's repeated, and in between we're filling in the gaps to give more context to that theme, like that. So it's very nice to think of the Gita. Sometimes people say like, yeah, the Bhagavad-gita goes like all over the place, but that's what a song does. That's what a conversation is. It's never just like, oh, A, B, C, D, E, F, and there we are at the end. No, that's not really much of a song or much of a conversation. So yeah, there's so much you can learn from the dialogical structure of the Bhagavad-gita. It's very, very beautiful, and it can be, I guess, analyzed in different ways. Yes, thank you.
Hi, Krishna Maharaj. I had 3 questions, and they were primarily based on your lectures that I heard previously. And I don't know if I could ask all 3 now, but I'll start with the first.
I don't understand. It's not believable. It's not practical. No, okay. Sure. No, carry on.
Because you give this example of how it was very encouraging for me. You in one of your YouTube lectures that I heard, you explained how there is a flight path, and the flight stays on the flight path for 30% of the time.
Mm.
And I was thinking, and you explained how, as practitioners or individuals trying to be devotees, that's the moot point, that we keep coming back. That's very essential. And I was just, like, when I heard this, and I was just reflecting on it a little bit, because there's also the principle of nishtha, of steadiness, that we really, as individuals who are trying to be Krishna conscious, we really hope to achieve nishtha one day and then steadily progress from there. And if I really analyze my own sadhana, then and also like what's going on inside and out, it's never steady. It's all about coming back again and again. So how do we place the principle of nishtha in this whole scenario?
Yeah. So just to recap, sometimes I give the analogy that when a plane goes from one airport to another, there's a flight path. But in any given flight, the pilot is only really ever on the flight path for 20 or 30% of the journey. Most of the time is off the flight path because of weather, because of traffic, because of other factors. But still at the end of the journey, the pilot still makes to his destination because he's always trying to come back. So sometimes I liken this to spiritual life, that it's not about living the perfect life that's going to take us to Krishna, but it's because practically we don't have that kind of capacity. But what it is about having the perfect intention and continually coming back. So how does this work with the journey from Shraddha to Prema? Well, yeah, I think you're right. Once we're at Nishtha, then we're on the flight path. Because then we're situated on the flight path. Before that is Anishtita Bhajana Kriya. And Anishtita Bhajana Kriya means we have struggles with sense gratification, we have struggles with vows, we have struggles with making decisions, we have struggles with the different circumstances that we encounter, and therefore we're constantly being blown off course. And Anishtita Bhajana Kriya is like the plane going off the flight path, but then the vows are what are continually bringing us back, and that determination. So perhaps in that metaphor, the destination is Nishtha. In other words, on the way to Nishtha, there's a lot of straying off the path, and that's where we require to always come back to the path. But once we're at the stage of Nishtha, practically then we are staying with Krishna, because the majority of Anartha Nivritti is completed by the stage of Nishtha. Of course, there is still some remnants, but the majority has completed. And therefore, doesn't that verse tells us, Nasta prayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya. Bhagavad-uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. Yeah, so by regular attendance at classes on the Bhagavatam, all that is troublesome within the heart is almost completely destroyed, and irrevocable service unto the Supreme Lord is established as an irrevocable fact. So Nishta basically means that. Almost everything is destroyed, and then you are basically on the path. So that is the stage that we're trying to get to Nishta. But I use that analogy just to explain that journey towards Nishta. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj. If I may ask a second question. It's also relating to an example you gave, and I found it very profound how you stated optimizing the browser of your mind and also our relationship to our mind. And in this particular lecture that I heard, you were speaking of mental health very nicely. I mean, not so elaborately, but then you mentioned about it. And then I was thinking, it's a generic question that in our movement as such, or institution, however one may like to see it, there are two extremes. There is one extreme which thinks we don't need to talk about mental health at all. And at least in my opinion, I must say that. And there is this other extreme where it's all about mental health. And then there is, sometimes I feel this overprotection which is there. And then I was thinking, as practitioners, we also have to have a relationship with our own mind. And at least for me personally, I see two extremes there in our movement as such. And so how do we really strike a balance maybe? Or how should we really relate to our own mind in the practice of sadhana?
Yeah. So basically we are in a conditioned stage of consciousness and we're trying to achieve transcendence. So that means that we can't ignore the conditioned aspects of our being because we're living with that. We're contending with that every single day. At the same time, we can't just be stuck there trying to solve problems. We need to factor in something transcendental to basically take us out of the situation. We can't just try to keep fixing problems here. Sometimes the analogy that I use is like when you go to a hospital. If I ask you who's more important, the nurse or the doctor? Take your pick. Which one do you want? You can only have one. Which one do you want? The nurse or the doctor? Because if you just say, well, I just want the doctor. Yeah, the doctor may be able to give you the operation that gets you out of hospital, but the nurse is the one that's going to help you survive day to day before that doctor comes. On the NHS, it could take weeks before the doctor turns up. So you need the day-to-day help of the nurse to keep you going, to keep you in a fit state, you know. And then finally the doctor will then come in and give you the ultimate solution to get out. And if you say, no, I just want the nurse, then yeah, you can survive, but then you'll just stay in the hospital for the rest of your life. You know, and you'll never ever get out. And you maybe have a comfortable, somewhat of a semi-comfortable time in the hospital, but you'll never get out and experience real life. So that's like the two extremes of those who say like overemphasize like let's deal with the material, the physical body, the subtle mind, and they don't factor in enough transcendence. Then it becomes like I just want the nurse. And then those who say like, yeah, just forget about all these things, we just have to chant and, you know, and then we'll get out, you know, that's the ultimate, you know, Aushadhi, that's the ultimate medicine, you know, that's the only medicine. Maybe they don't factor enough day-to-day care, which is going to help you to survive and be able to practice on a level where you can get out. So therefore, hospitals have nurses and doctors. And therefore, the Krishna consciousness movement needs nurses and doctors. The Krishna consciousness movement needs enough doctors that can provide us with the transcendence of the ultimate solution and enough nurses and spiritual support structures which will help us to survive while we're still trying to achieve that transcendence. And so, yeah, we have these hierarchy. Maslow talked about the hierarchy of needs, isn't it? It says like on the bottom level is physical needs. Then higher than that is safety needs. Then higher than that is emotional needs. Then higher than that is like ego needs or esteem needs. And then higher than that is self-actualization. So we have a tendency to just knock everything out and then just say like here, but what does it stand on? So Varnashram, care for the body and the mind. You'll see that in the Bhagavatam, it's reinforcing dharma, or this kind of Varnashram dharma and support for the body and mind. At times it promotes it, and at times it just destroys it. Sometimes it's saying, yes, dharma, we need it. And then other times it's saying, we have nothing as Vaishnavas to do with all of this. Even if you look at Srila Prabhupada's instructions, in one letter, Srila Prabhupada will say, Varnashram dharma is essential for progressive human civilization. And in another letter, Srila Prabhupada will say, Vaishnavas have nothing to do with Varnashram dharma. Because both things are true. You can see it, another way you can see it is if you're trying to build a building, then the way you do it is first you build a scaffolding. And then what you do is with that scaffolding, then within that you build the building. And then once the cement has set, then you can take the scaffolding down. So you can also see it like that, that this is like scaffolding. It's a support structure that helps us to build our spiritual life. But ultimately, it's not providing the solution in and of itself. Does that help?
Maybe it's a bit far-fetched, but I was listening to this conversation between you and Chaitanya Prabhu, and you were speaking about counseling and these aspects where we counsel devotees. And you also addressed this point, both of you addressed this point that sometimes we're not trained enough. And I was thinking, especially for us younger generation, and hopefully by the mercy of devotees, if you continue to stay on this right path and a few years down the line, or even now for ourselves and others, it's very nice to learn this art of counseling in a way. But then if I look at immediately next to me or at the broader picture, there is no, maybe like Chaupati temple has some or something like that, but there is no training as such for us to be counselors. Because also the Vaishnava relationship is like that. At some point you are counseling somebody, maybe as a friend or as an authority or however. So I was thinking, how can we really be a little more conscious in our individual but also in terms of our community to develop this a little bit?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I sometimes tell devotees the most frequent service you do, the most potentially powerful service that you can do, which is simultaneously can be the most destructive service that you do, is give advice to people. Giving advice is just like so much part of our life as Vaishnavas, because we live in a community, we're always advising, we're always being approached in that way. But it's amazing that we don't have any training on how to do that. I would say that it is a very good thing to have basic training in how to give advice to other people. It doesn't mean we have to go away, for 3 years and become a qualified counselor or something like that, but some basic training. Because when you're advising someone, there are so many factors to take into account. There are so many different angles to how to formulate your advice in a way that's going to allow that person to really be able to digest it and then move forward in their life. And so many problems in devotees' spiritual life is because they're given bad advice. And then they follow that in all good faith, and then it doesn't turn out right, and then it means they lose all faith in all advice. And then that leaves them in an even bigger problem. So yes, we must learn these basic things. Like even now in the world, like some decades ago, they realized that everyone should know first aid. Like basic first aid, everyone should know, say, because anyone could, you know. So I'm sure in the temple you have first aiders, is it? No. We don't do this stuff. But yeah, generally in the world you have first aiders, physical first aid. But now what they're realizing is they have something called mental first aid. You heard about this? Yeah, there's basically like basic understanding that everyone should have about mental health. Because it's not just like a few, highly qualified people that are dealing with mental health issues now. Basically everyone is, because it's so widespread. But most of us have no understanding of what mental health looks like. What are the signs that someone is going through depression? What are the signs of, abnormal types of behavior that may need to be addressed in different ways? We're not trained to spot all of this. And there oftentimes we give advice without having. So again, it's about these things are not going to save someone, but they're going to help them on the way to transcendence. So it's worth putting some time and effort. So I feel, it doesn't require much. It's not like just a few succinct workshops and courses on how to give good advice can go a long way. So we can do that. I do something on 12 steps to giving good advice, 12 things you should consider before giving someone advice. So like something basic like that, I think can help a lot. Yes.
When I was just in New Mayapur and I was listening to tapes of Prabhupada, and basically throughout all the tapes he's stressing that point of simple lives, high thinking, simple village life, being satisfied with bare necessities, not depending on the city. And somehow coming from a background like this, before joining, I often think about this, especially how Prabhupada. He will say sometimes, and then we'll have a bullock cart and things which nowadays even we as followers of Prabhupada, I'm sure many will say it's kind of crazy to think in that way. We are so far away. And you spoke also about addiction, how it's a huge topic. We're addicted to so many things, to our phone and the supermarket, to just go and buy whatever we want, whenever we feel like. So what's your perspective on Prabhupada's vision and where we are now as a movement, and especially also Prabhupada having a worldwide vision, he had a huge vision, he didn't think in a small way. How will we move in that direction? Yes, how? Or maybe it was a bad idea to even go in that direction?
It's a huge question,
What's your thoughts on?
Whenever this topic comes up, I feel like the most unqualified person to talk about it, because I'm just like, here I am with all this technology, and I've never lived, I've always been a city slicker my whole life. So whatever I say will be theoretical. Sometimes for a city slicker, silence is deafening, It's like sometimes you go to a fireplace, like there's nothing happening here. Yes, but we understand that we have to culture this within ourselves, that yes, it is simple living, high thinking. Basically, the problem today in the world is that people's consciousness has become hijacked You know, practically there's no headspace anymore to deeply connect spiritually, because we're just bombarded with so many messages, we're overloaded with so many responsibilities, and we're distracted by so many temptations. So practically there's no room to really for quality spiritual contemplation, for quality spiritual practice. There's no headspace and there's no time space, because people, just to survive in this world, they have to work so hard. So if we want to create headspace in consciousness, if we want to create physical space in our lives so that we actually have time, and if we want to create a social space where people can actually interact together in meaningful ways to then support each other, then we need these projects. Because otherwise in the city, you're just not going to be able to find that kind of space to really powerfully practice spiritual life. Of course, we are in the cities mainly to share Krishna consciousness. Prahlad Maharaj says that, Nevo Dvijay Paradaratyaya Vetaranyas, that, you know, I don't want to go just away by myself, Vimumuksha Eko, and just be liberated. I want to go to the towns and cities, but specifically Maya, Sukhaya, Bharamudvahato Vimuddhan, to help those who are overburdened by thoughts of sense gratification. So we're in the city mainly just to share Krishna consciousness, but this is not where we really need to be living. Where we need to be living is in a different space. So yeah, we need those projects which are difficult, because the world is structured in such a way that for such projects to be financially viable and is very difficult. And then the second problem is to find devotees who are in that frame of mind, who can actually live in those places and dedicate themselves in that way, is also very difficult. And so traditionally those projects have always been harder to manifest. Of course, we do have some examples in the ISKCON world. So in essence, yes, we do need those projects, and perhaps what we all need to start doing, preaching to myself, is learning to be in those spaces and learning to appreciate those spaces, and culturing a movement in which we can like really live in such kind of community. Just a week ago I was watching a documentary about the Amish community. It's very like interesting, very interesting. And you know, like somehow they're able to create a situation where they're kind of like in this world, but they're completely like separate, you know. And of course, we may not do everything exactly like them, but they have a certain, you know, they've cultured a certain capacity within their community to kind of not have to be part of this world. Which is like, how do you do that? You know, most of us, like, if we're ejected from the world like that, it's very uncomfortable. So yeah, these are just some thoughts. I don't have any answers. Yes, yeah.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, you mentioned in the beginning that Bhagavad-gita, Srimad Bhagavatam are in the framework of a conversation. And for me it's always difficult to study a conversation and get to get a structure of a conversation, to get like the philosophy of a situation of a conversation. So for me it's easier to study if it's in, like, you know, in university you don't study your conversations, but you study like schedules, like how different aspects are interacting. So for me that way of studying is more accessible for me. So do you have any hints how to study with this mind.
Yeah,
a conversation.
Yeah. I understand where you're coming from. Sometimes people ask me what my favorite subject or what I was best at school. So probably the subject which I had most ability in was maths, and it kind of reflects like the way, not that I have much intelligence, but whatever intelligence I have, it works in structures, it works in formulas, it works in sequence, it works in boxes to some extent. And so even when I try to share philosophy with people, it comes out like that, like it inadvertently comes out like that, you know. There's always an acronym and there's always a sequence. Kadamakananda Swami used to make fun of me. He used to say, like, when are you going to write some books without acronyms? So if you keep on writing acronyms, when you take sannyas, I'm going to have to call you ABC Swami. He used to make fun. And then it was very interesting actually, my interaction with him, because he is like the complete opposite. So like, he has a very like a very, what do you call, like an abstract intelligence. So even like when I give a class, like I have a structure in my mind, I know where I'm going and I know what point I'm going to go. But he says like, he said to me, I'm completely different. I just go round and round and round and round, and by the end I come to the point. It's just like I'm exploring in my class. Like I don't have a set path, But what I realized is that my mathematical approach to sharing philosophy has its limitations, because humans are not robots. Humans are conscious, they have emotions. And why am I telling all of you that, why am I saying all of this? Because this is one of the reasons why I think philosophy is given in conversation. Because philosophy in conversation necessarily means that we're talking about a human situation. We're talking about individuals who have emotions, individuals who have dilemmas. We're talking about philosophy within a very practical situation. And therefore, philosophy as a formula can be very neat and clean and logical, but philosophy which comes about in conversation has the added element of how to understand that philosophy in a human context, from humans who are going through emotions and situations. And so and that's why I'm saying, when we're reading the Bhagavad-gita, we're not just reading philosophy, but we can think of Arjuna as a person on a battlefield in the intensity of that situation. And now let me see the question he's asking in context of that. And the philosophy comes alive, you see. So, like Chitraketu is having a conversation with Angira Muni after, he's lost his child. And then all of that philosophy, it starts looking different in the context, not different, but you get a different entrance into it in the context of the situation. And so I think philosophy in conversation is more complex, but it needs to be more complex, because philosophy in conversation factors in the human condition. And that's what makes philosophy useful. Otherwise, what's the point of philosophy if you can't map it to human condition? It's just very one-dimensional. It doesn't get to the heart of the issue. So that's just one kind of philosophical speculation of what I have, why philosophy is given so much in conversation. Because to understand philosophy in the context of character and circumstance is extremely powerful. But it's harder.
But could you maybe give a tip how to enter into this complex world, of studying of philosophy in conversations? If you have
we used to have this thing, the 5 Ps. Back to my. Whenever we were say for example, you're reading a conversation of the Bhagavatam, then what we used to say is place. Like, just try to picture yourself first in that place. So like if you're reading, I don't know, whatever it is, like a Jamil, and now, the Yamadutas and the, Vishnu Dutas are having a conversation. Just try to imagine that whole scene, the intensity of it, what's going on there. Then the person, like put yourself in that person's shoes, in that person's position. Try to hear now as the person hearing it, not just like I'm a third. I'm going to try and be in that. And then we say predicament, like try to ask, if you were that person, what questions would be on your mind, what fears, what anxiety. So we're trying to go into a deeper, like meditative reading, a deeper kind of entrance into that pastime. So like this, I can't remember all of them now. But so like that you can do. So even Christian monks do this actually. They have something called Lectio Divina. And this is where Christian monastics, what they would do is they would take like the Bible or something and they would read like sentences and then deeply try to like enter into like, it was a very qualitative type of reading. So, yeah, so I think there's a practice of prayerful reading that one can use perhaps to draw more of this out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maharaj, that you take your time for helping us. And I was meditating on this point a lot, that Prabhupada actually said that we should show the love to him in cooperation. And you were also talking about this community of love, and I think it's very important to cultivate that. So I was wondering what every one of us can do to come nearer to this community of love, and what practical steps we should take to just be more loving and more supportive.
Yeah. Once recently I gave a seminar on the community of love, and what I based it upon was the Antya Leela of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu goes back to Jagannath Puri and he decides that now I'll just be here for the rest of my life. And in the beginning of the Antya Leela, the first 13 chapters, he's basically having interactions with his devotees. And some of them he's appreciating them, and some of them he's correcting them. And if you study these chapters of the Antya Leela very closely, then you can see how Mahaprabhu is expertly creating a community of love in Jagannath Puri. And from his different interactions with his different associates, different lessons are coming out as to what makes a community of love. For example, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has this incredible interaction with Haridas Thakur. And what is coming out from his interaction with Haridas Thakur is Haridas Thakur's deep spiritual immersion. This is a foundational principle of a community of love, that you can only have a community of love when each individual is developing their love for Krishna. The strength of the community is basically the conglomerate of the strength of each individual's growing connection with Krishna. So if you have a community where the individuals are not advancing towards Krishna, how you will have a community of love? So it requires spiritual inspiration. Then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is interacting with Sanatan Goswami. And with Sanatan Goswami, he has incredible appreciation for his culture and etiquette. This is another ingredient of a community of love. Unless there is culture, unless there is etiquette, unless there is proper dealings between individuals, how to navigate relationships, there's no community of love. Then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is interacting with Raghunath Das Goswami. Raghunath Das Goswami just becomes the emblem of renunciation and detachment. This is also a secret to the community of love, because when nobody cares about power, when nobody cares about prestige, when nobody cares about popularity, when nobody cares about profit, when we're detached from all of the external aspects of institution and all of these things, then you can really have a community of love. Otherwise, what's going to happen is there's going to be constant competition within the community to achieve all of these things. Raghunath shows us he's completely detached from all of that. So that's another key to developing a community of love. So like this, there are so many. Rupa Goswami, when Mahaprabhu interacts with him in Puri, what's really coming out is how Mahaprabhu has just empowered Rupa Goswami to an incredible degree. That's another aspect of a community of love. A community of love occurs when everyone is trying to empower each other to be the best they can. Everyone is cheering everyone else on. On Saturday, I was at a youth Hindu conference. Anyway, one of the sessions was called Breakout. So I didn't quite realize what it was until I got into the session. And the session was that you have to break through 4 pieces of wood with your hand. So they gave us 4 pieces of wood. And it was a serious wood, yeah, like proper wood. I've got a video of it, I did. And it was like this whole concept that you have to break through it. I was like, how is this possible? But then in the breakout session, they were talking about how as a community we can do it if we empower each other. So it was like a psychological thing, and there was like cheering, and when you got up there was like an energy, and then it was just like in that moment, just like bang, and it just went. Well, I did it by Krishna's mercy. But one thing that really came out was the power of having a supportive community around you. Community of love means everyone's behind each other. Like when someone scores the goal, then everyone's just as happy as everyone else. A community, Govinda Swami would say, of no envy. That's a community of love. So if you want to know how to develop a community of love, and the ultimate thing, or one of the main things of why Mahaprabhu was able to create a community of love in Jagannath Puri is because of Mahaprabhu himself. Because someone was bringing everyone together in that way. There was a glue. Why was Srila Prabhupada able to achieve such amazing things? Because he was the unifying factor. For Prabhupada, they would do anything. And that brought everyone together. So there has to be some glue like that in the community which is bringing people together. So yeah, if you study, then you will find all the secrets. It's right there in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Therefore Kaviraj Goswami says, Chaitanya Charitamrita Nitya Karapan Jaha Hoy Te Premananda Bhakti Tattva Gyan. He says, brothers, sisters, read Chaitanya Charitamrita every single day. Jaha hoite, by doing so, Premananda, you will experience great happiness, Bhakti Tattva Gyan, and you will learn all the secrets to devotional life. You can learn everything. Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's all there. That helps.
Thank you so much. From this, another question arose in me.
Yeah.
I was reading this quote of Dr. Jiva Maharaj downstairs actually. He says that you should interact with everyone like you do with like the person.
As though your spiritual life depends on it, I think he said. Something of that nature.
Or I guess with the person you love the most.
Oh, okay, yes.
And I was thinking about that because sometimes, like just in our level that we're not that elevated yet, we often don't know how to act in really loving way, not of the level of lust or whatever. And how can we really
get to there?
Yeah, get to that point of loving relationships and not something else, because sometimes we just cannot distinguish.
Yeah, that is to interact with every devotee as you interact with the person you love the most. Wow. That's high. Again, my mathematical mind will look at it like this. We're going on a continuum from selfishness to selflessness. So that level of interaction is there. It's a very high level of selflessness where you're completely off your own platform and you're really just giving. Between selfishness and selflessness, there's a huge area here. And I think, my understanding is, between selfishness and selflessness, there's sensitivity. And my realization is that this is where we need to focus in our relationships. We want to get off the platform of selfishness, but complete selflessness or high levels of selflessness at our stage may be very difficult. Yeah, we have glimmers when we think like, yeah, okay, I'll serve everyone prashad, sacrifice my plate. But generally it's difficult to consistently act on a platform of selflessness. We're not there, most of us. But perhaps if we could try to situate ourselves in sensitivity in relationships, that when we interact, to try to be sensitive, where is this person coming from? What is causing them to act like this? What are their needs, interests and concerns? To be more conscious about people around us. Unless we become sensitive, there's no question of becoming selfless. How can you be selfless if you're not first sensitive? So once we were at Buckland and they asked me for a topic, so I called it the sensitive topic. And I didn't tell anyone what the seminar was about. There was all this, everyone was like, oh God, like everyone was like this fever pitch, you know, by the time I got to the mic, everyone's thinking the sensitive topic, was going to talk about female Diksha gurus, or, you know, the GBC, or this or that, the sensitive topic. Everyone was like totally inspired, you know. And then the whole class I just talked about sensitivity. How we have to be sensitive in our relationships. But I feel that is what it is, you know. It's interesting how Gajendra became an elephant. Because, as I remember, if someone can correct me, but he had not received a sage appropriately in the previous life. That was the story, right? Gajendra, right? Yes, that's the story. He was worshipping the deity and a sage had come and there was this dilemma, should I continue worshipping the deity or should I host the sage? And he made the sage wait, and therefore he got cursed that because you have been insensitive, therefore now become an elephant. And then perhaps the elephant becomes like, of course we love elephants as well, but in the metaphorical sense, the elephant becomes that emblem of insensitivity, because an elephant just walks and doesn't realize the destruction. Therefore, even Vaishnava Parad in the Chaitanya Charitamrita is likened to the mad elephant offense. So why is that elephant is representing insensitivity? So if you think about the root of all offenses, it's insensitivity. That's basically it. Like, I always wondered, why do you get a reaction for an offense when you do it unintentionally? That's not fair. I didn't intend to offend someone. Why should I get a reaction? But even the fact that you didn't intend to means there's some level of insensitivity within you that wasn't alert to the fact of how this person is going to react in this situation. So even the fact that you didn't intend to offend someone may show or does show that there's a level of insensitivity and therefore there's a reaction. So yes, even if we can't do that, to see everyone and interact with them the way we'd interact with our most beloved, at least if we can begin interacting sensitively, then a community comes about. I'm just thinking there have been many questions and answers, but maybe some of you have some reflections or maybe some comments on any of the questions, and maybe we could take some time for that, and then if we run out of that, then we'll take another question. Is that okay? I have a reflection? Okay, yeah, sure. So now we'll just do reflections, and if anyone wants to add anything to any of the questions, any realizations, yes.
I just wanted to add to what you were speaking now and in this question, because I was also exploring the notion of spiritual friendships, and my spiritual master, His Holiness Niranjana Swami, he speaks about that very much, like how to develop good relationships. And I just remember how this level that you, Yamuna, mentioned of interacting with a person as a beloved, he said that, I think Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Jaiva Dharma, he explains the level of friendship of a Madhyama Adhikari, and he there says that that a Madhyama, when he establishes a friendship with a certain person, and in a description of a Madhyama we know that he establishes the friendship with actually all devotees, regardless of whether they are junior, equal or senior, and he considers them a place of worship. So that's the love that he expresses in this way. And also, it's not even that the person that we treat is the beloved person, but he loves the person more than he loves himself. So this person is more important to me than my own life. So I found that also. And that's also a higher goal. And there are two more characteristics of this friendship, but unfortunately I cannot remember them. But that's like a higher goal. But for us, in our spiritual life, we should at least advance from Kanishta Adhikari to Madhyama. And this is the level of friendship actually that we should develop. And he also said, like in this lecture, how the safest position of every one of us is to be in the position of a servant, because here we cannot make a mistake. And there is where comes this, what you were saying, how to be a servant actually needs to be sensitive. So this is something.
Thank you so much, yes. Yeah, any reflections or anything?
In one of your lecture a couple of weeks ago, you also mentioned why deity worship was introduced in Tetra
I
Yuga.
was thinking of that also.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you go see, you say. Yeah, no, I was just reflecting on the Bhagavatam, how in the Bhagavatam it mentions in the 7th canto when and why deity worship was introduced. So the 7th canto of the Bhagavatam says that deity worship was always going on, but when was it introduced as like a religious process? And what the 7th canto says is it was introduced at the beginning of Treta Yuga. And the reason it given is because the sages saw the insensitive dealings between living entities, and therefore they introduced deity worship. So that's very interesting, because when you think about like what's the connection, why would deity worship help to address insensitive dealings between living entities? We could do a whole brainstorm on that, but a few points definitely come up that when you worship the deity, you become much more sensitive, because there has to be attention to cleanliness, attention to time, attention to detail. You have to be very, everything has to be done in a very specific way. Therefore you become very, very conscious. And the other thing that happens is when you worship the deity with devotion, then you begin to be more equipped to see Krishna within all living entities. And then on your point about going above Kanistha, that's exactly what the Kanistha is described as. Archayam eva hareye, pujam ya shadaye hate, natad bhakteshu cha anyeshu, sa bhakta prakrita shmita. Who is a Kanistha? One who worships the deity but cannot see Krishna within the living entities, within the devotees. So yeah, thank you.
that we have to choose our association. And now when I've heard everything what Timona Mataji said and her, and we all know that association can affect our spiritual life. And we are not all on that level that to find love in everyone and to have that loving relationship. Could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, so we have to, Rupa Goswami says we should look for sajatiya, which means like-minded. If you look at sajatiya as a term, like-minded association, you can see it on different levels. One level of like-minded association is that aspirationally you are the same, which is that you want to find love for God. So if you find another person who also wants to achieve love for God, then you are sajatiya, you are like-minded. But then we can say deeper than that is not just to be aspirationally the same, but to be theologically the same. If you meet another person who wants to achieve love of God by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, then you are even more sajatiya, because you are now not just aspirationally the same, but theologically you're on the same path, so you can serve each other better. But then it's said that not just aspirationally and theologically the same, but also personality-wise the same. You have certain, characteristics and certain approaches and certain character traits which complement each other and which mean that you can naturally help each other and connect with each other in a better way. So that's also important. So like this, we should look for sajatiya, not just someone who wants to be spiritual, not just someone who is also practicing the same thing as you, but within that movement of people practicing the same thing, there are many personalities, and we have to also find personalities who we can naturally connect with. So we need to do that without becoming like a clique, without it being like, these are my people who I get along with, and then... So it's not like we need to learn how to connect with everyone in the Krishna consciousness movement. But at the same time, it's natural that people of a certain personality will gravitate together. Birds of a feather flock together. That's just how it is, But we have to do it in such a way that it doesn't lead to division. But at the same time, we should not also try to make everything, that's also impersonal. It's natural that we'll personally gravitate towards certain types of people, and that's okay, as long as we don't neglect or outcast others. Once we were in the Brahmacharya ashram and someone was giving a class and he said, look around in the room. So we all started looking around at each other. And he said, if it wasn't for Krishna consciousness, would you be friends with any of these people? I kind of looked around like, like we're so different. Like in one sense, would we be? But by Krishna consciousness, sometimes we can transcend over that, and we do connect with even people who are very different culturally. But then within that, sometimes we also have to accept that we will be, there will be some who we're like-minded with more naturally. So look for that. I don't know how long we go. It's 10 to 9. So I mean, I'm okay. But maybe last one and then. No, you can both go and then we'll finish that.
Thank you, Maharaj. I wanted to ask you a question when we were explaining about playing. How is it just
Playing,
to
yes.
stage on the track? It's maybe a bit personal. What is keeping you, like, what are these 30% which is keeping you in Krishna consciousness?
Air traffic control.
Like, why are you still, keep going on this track?
Of course, thank you. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to reflect on that. Sometimes I do wonder, why am I... I think for me, like, the biggest inspiration is, what inspired me about Krishna consciousness is living theology. Like, I really felt like coming to Krishna consciousness was an opportunity to see theology living in individuals. And first, that obviously began with Srila Prabhupada, who was such a living Bhagavatam, you know, the person Bhagavat. For me, more than even scripture, the living theology gives me a lot of faith. And so then over the years, living with Vaishnavas who embody that level of faith, that level of dedication, who are living and breathing examples of Krishna consciousness, I think for me that makes it achievable, it makes it inspiring, and it just makes it real, you know. And so I feel like, relationships with devotees who are living and experiencing Krishna consciousness, whether they be from the past, not present anymore, or whether they be here now, I think those examples, and using their examples to always come back and remember the great thing that we're trying to achieve, I think that's really a big inspiration for me. Sometimes it can be as simple as just like, I have pictures of all these inspirational people, and sometimes in the evening, I'll just look at pictures of devotees. It's something as simple as that. And just look at pictures of devotees and it just pacifies the heart. It's like, let's go for it. Let's try. You know, so I think Vaishnavas are incredible. I think, you know, and Srila Prabhupada, he really was able to create a movement in which there's living theology. I think that's very powerful. And I think we're also surrounded by saintly people, but sometimes we don't recognize that, we don't see that, we don't appreciate that. Like there was one book, I remember someone was giving a class and he was giving there was a book distributor there who must have done Sankirtan for, you know, most of their life in the ashram. And he was describing this Sankirtan devotee, this book distributor, and he said, let me just tell you about this person in non-theological terms. Every day they woke up at, 3 o'clock in the morning. They slept on the floor. For the first 5 hours of the day, they prayed. Then they went out to basically beg charity all day and to tell people about the message of God. And then they would come back and have a very humble meal and then go to sleep, and then they kept doing that day after day for 30 years. Right? Now, if you just think, that's just that's the life of a Sankirtan devotee. But if you think about that in theological terms, you think like that sounds like the life of a saint. That actually sounds like the life of a saint. But we're just like, oh yeah, he's one of the Sankirtan devotees. You know? It's like, well, how many books did you read today? But if you actually think about that level of dedication, that's actually incredible. Like we just think, oh yeah, he's chanting 16 rounds. But like, who in the world prays for 2 hours every day? You're chanting 16 rounds, but are you doing any service? But even chanting 16 rounds, who prays in the world for 2 hours every day? That's quite impressive. So I think I realized in my life, I felt that I underestimated the devotees a lot. Because we have maybe very high ideals, and then we're always seeing how much they're falling short of a high ideal. Therefore, in our mind, sometimes we don't register the value of a Vaishnava. So yeah, sorry, I'm kind of going on now, but yeah, in essence, I think for me, that's what it is. Devotees, I think just devotees are amazing. Okay, so I guess lost, yeah.
I just wanted to share, last week His Holiness Bhakti-Vigyan Maharaj was here with us. And now when we are speaking of Vaishnavas in humility in relationships, it's something he said which really struck my heart. So it's not verbatim, but then something along the lines of this. He said that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that our contact with devotees is a result of an internal cry, and therefore the arrangement is made. That it's a result of an internal cry. I found that very profound. And also in terms of humility, he said, greater is the gap between our present condition and what we want to become. It becomes a cause of our humility. So sometimes, like we were speaking, this high ideal is there, like Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj said, that like you would speak with your loved one, it's such a high ideal. And the very fact that we're so far away should make us humble in relationships. So I also thought that was very nice.
Thank you so much for sharing, yeah. Yeah, and maybe just on your point about internal cry and humility, just my mathematical mind will try to bring this full circle and back to our original point about the Bhagavad-gita, that the first chapter of the Bhagavad-gita is entitled Arjuna Vishad Yoga. Actually, the first chapter has two titles, Arjuna Vishad Yoga and Shainya Darshan. So Srila Prabhupada, when he writes his Gita, then he uses the title Shainya Darshan, which means observing the armies. But the other title that the Acharyas give for the first chapter of the Gita is Arjuna Vishad Yoga. Vishad is an interesting Sanskrit word. It can mean different things, but essentially it means desperation, dejection, depression. You get the idea. So every chapter of the Bhagavad-gita is a yoga, because every chapter of the Gita is actually connecting you to the Supreme. So the first chapter of the Gita is literally the yoga of dejection, the yoga of depression. Try advertising that one and see how many people come. The yoga of depression. But the way the Acharyas frame that is they say the first chapter is the yoga of depression because until the soul cries, Atma Krandan, the cry of the soul, that is the first stage from which spiritual connection takes place. When that humility and that desperation arises within the heart of the living entity which causes them to cry. So when Arjuna cries on the battlefield, becomes completely depressed and dejected, then that becomes the beginning of his yoga. Because then from that cry and from that humility, he then is able to contact Krishna, who then takes that humility and that cry and then reciprocates with it by giving divyam gyan, which means transcendental knowledge. So yes, definitely this cry of the soul, this humility is the beginning of actually making deep connection with Krishna and the Vaishnavas, and therefore, yes, when the internal cry is there, then the Vaishnavas come, and in that way Krishna becomes much more accessible. So thank you so much. Thank you for your attention, for your patience.